Good morning, everyone. This is Jeffy Kennedy, author of Epic Fantasy Romance. I'm here with my first cup of coffee. Delightful. Today is Tuesday, October 11th. Delightful, crisp October mornings here in Santa Fe. You can see the grape leaves turning behind me if you are on video. So, I have lots of things going on all of a sudden. Probably not all of a sudden. But for those of you reading Sorceress Moons on audiobook, on Scribd, uh, Oraya's Enchantment is out today. Woo, woo, woo. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. Try to get the links up on the website. So yeah, that's exciting. Uh, I shared in my private Facebook group, Jeffy's Closet, the cover for the standalone of Familiar Winter Magic. It's not quite out yet, but we sent it off for formatting. I did spend a little bit of time getting that ready yesterday. It's kind of funny because I needed to send Assistant Corrine the final document, which, I mean, in general, organization is one of my superpowers. Uh, like, do you all ever have to do those things like those strategy session icebreaker things, whatever, like when they ask what your superpower is? I always go with the sarcastic superpower. Once I was doing a strategy session when I was um, it was for the SIFWA board, and every once in a while I encounter a person who is like completely not amused by me. That needs to be like in all caps. um, and it's almost always women who are like trying to lead a group doing a thing and do not find me funny, also in all caps. How can anyone not find me funny, you people? I can't imagine. Anyway, um, I had said on there that when we went around asking for, like what people's superpowers were, um, which I think find ever so slightly dorky. I understand why people do it, and yet. And I said that my superpower is that I can open any bottle of wine, which, it's funny. There are people who do not like jokes about alcohol. I don't know. Maybe it's insensitive of me. Maybe I should give a content warning. But that is my favorite non serious reply to the what is your superpower? Because it is literally true. I have gotten wine bottles open with a pair of car keys. Once I was at a gathering where there was a wine bottle where the cork had like weirdly melted into the neck of the bottle, and I was able to get that open. So yeah, I feel like it's a real superpower. It's partly a matter of diligence and desire, but aren't all superpowers? Anyway, if pressed, I will list other superpowers. One of them is organization. And in general, I do pretty well. But when I do this is a thing that happens with me with writing, because when I begin a project, as longtime listeners know, I have various ways of referring to it, right? Um, because I don't have a good working title for it yet. And then when I get a working title, sometimes it changes as I go. And then I don't always go through and change all of the relevant folder names in my storage system, my file system on the computer, to reflect those changes. So I sometimes have things in several places based on the iterations of how I've referred to a project. This happened to me when we did Forgotten Empires. The Orchid Throne was originally called The Slave King and the Flower Queen. And which I think is still a good title. But Sarah didn't like it. Agent Sarah, she didn't like having slave in the going out on submission. So we changed it. I do not remember what we went out on submission with it. And then once St. Martin's bought it, we changed the title yet again. And when it came around, by the time, like we'd negotiated the transfer, the contract, the sale, all of those things, and my book wasn't due for a really long time, and I finished something else first. By the time it came for me to work on that book, I couldn't find the manuscript because I couldn't remember what we'd freaking called it. I couldn't find the file folder. And it's complicated by the fact that I have file folders in my email and then also in File Explorer. So it took it took me a legit long time to find that freaking book again because I had lost all of the names. So same thing happens with anthologies. When I begin a story for an anthology, I refer to it by, like some working title, and I file it under the anthology folder. And then later, when I get ready to move it to be a standalone, I do need to move it to that actual series folder. But I don't always do this in a complete way. So maybe my superpower is not organization. Um, or maybe it's a lack of diligence and desire. So anyway, trying to find the final word version of Familiar Winter Magic for Karina, I had to look in a bunch of different places, and I found, I like sort by date so I can find the most recent version because I don't always name perfectly depending on version. Sometimes, like, the final is called V3 or something like that. Sometimes it's called final. I think we're going to have to face that maybe organization, at least as so far as file nomenclature is concerned, is not my superpower. So I I finally found it, but then I found these ones that were like notes from someone, and I like did not remember that I had somebody read, and it turns out I had several somebody's read for Familiar Winter Magic who had not read Bonds of Magic so far. I'd asked in the closet, and I had copy edits from somebody who had like gone beyond the simple beta read. So it was just funny because I didn't remember that at all. And granted, it was a year ago, but I do think it's funny when I don't remember things at all. And I was asking Karine about it, and she said, well, I think you could be forgiven for getting certain things like that. But so anyway, I got that together. I got the front matter done. I got that to Karine for formatting so we could get that up. I also received the audiobook of Shadow Wizard yesterday. Mysteriously missing chapter 15, however. So I have to get that from my audiobook narrator, and I'm waiting on the audiobook cover, and then that'll get uploaded, and then it takes a while to like process through on ACX. It'll be available on Audible first because I get better royalties for that. I get the 40% for the first 3 months if I do exclusive. So sorry, those of you who listen on Scribd or other platforms. So I did all that stuff yesterday. That felt like a productive day. I moved the novella forward some, not as much as I wanted to, but so it goes. Uh, and then I wanted to talk to you all about something that I saw yesterday about writing series. So, and I am going to file off the serial numbers here, but I saw this. Okay, so a gal who's written a couple of fantasy series put up a post about how she was going back to getting a full-time job because it turned out she could not make a living um, as a traditionally published author, which we have heard this story before, and it does suck. However, I, I just feel like I don't want to be unkind, but every time I read one of these, woe is me. I thought I was going to be rich. I thought I was going to be J.K. Rowling, and it turns out traditional publishing doesn't sell well or doesn't pay well. It's I kind of wonder, like where have people been? Is that unkind of me? I understand having the dream, but I don't know. I always understood I was not going to make mountains of money traditionally publishing or even self-publishing. And for all of us, a living wage is a different thing. This gal said she wasn't even making minimum wage. However, her husband also had a salary, so she wasn't worried about being out on the streets. But I saw this because one of my other author friends, who is traditionally published um, exclusively and does pretty well, uh, tweeted about it and said that there's a well-known phenomenon, paraphrasing, of the series death spiral, where the second book doesn't sell as well as the first, and the third not as well, and that it tanks your numbers so far as traditional publishing is concerned, and then they don't, but they still want you to write a series. So I have a lot of thinks about this and a lot of feels about this. um, what my friend had said was that traditional publishing wants authors to write series because the subsequent books sell the first book and they continue to make money on the first book. The thing is that from a self-publishing perspective, you learn that writing a series is a very lucrative way to go about it. It's not mountains of money, and yes, you do lose sales from second book to first book, but this is a it's not a it's not a strange phenomenon. A lot of people will read the first book and give it a try and then decide that for whatever reason you are not their particular catnip, and they won't continue with the series. It doesn't have anything to do with the nature of series themselves. And I think that, and this is a postulate, it would be interesting to see some actual data, but I think that many authors, if they wrote standalone after standalone after standalone, would find that they were getting drop off between those books also, because people are going to try a book and decide that you are not their cup of tea. And there's there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how art and entertainment works. So so there's that. It's like, is it a series death spiral? I don't know. Um, the thing is, I feel like I've read so many of these screeds from new authors saying how they had their debut book and they got this massive advance, like a six-figure deal or something, and it was so great and they were so happy, and that's fabulous. But then they don't seem to process that it can go away. That this doesn't mean that, and this is what they write about. They're like, oh, and then it turns out they didn't give me as big of an advance the next time, and or they didn't offer me any advance at all. And it's like, well, welcome to the world of publishing. I don't mean to be callous, but it is how the business works. And they give you big money the first time when you're a debut because they think that maybe they want to snag that debut magic and maybe you'll be fabulous. And it's a crapshoot. Nobody knows which books are going to take off. I mean, that's the bottom line. And the self-publishers talk about it. Why does this series sell better than this other series? And ultimately you don't know, because it has to do with reader catnip. How are you connecting? Who loves your story? And that people, right? And people Authors want to be able to control it, publishers want to be able to control it, and you just can't. It's just, I'm sorry. So, the other thing I see happening though is that there is a reluctance sometimes among traditionally published authors in particular to cater to commercialism, shall we say, to cater to the marketing mindset. Possibly because a lot of them come out of workshops where there is a lot of attention paid to art and literature and writing something that's important. And it's gauche to think in terms of sales and money. And I know that this is true because I have had some of these authors sneer at me for talking in terms of the market and writing to market. Uh, it's something, well, kind of bourgeois, for want of a better word. It sort of like harkens back to the idea of like publishing as being something that like the nobility do. And, you live off of your trust fund and you write art. And going into trade, if we want to stick with the Austen-esque theme, going into trade is, well, lowering, right? So I've been referring to my friend who had been listening to the Bright Familiar audiobook and kind of analyzing how I write and trying to learn from my story structure, which has been interesting to follow along, um, with his thoughts on that. And then he finished yesterday and said that I do a really good job of making the reader want to buy the next book. And I said, thank you. And he said it was really compelling at the end and all of this. And I, I appreciated the compliment, but I also feel like this is something that if you want to make a living as a writer, if you are in trade, you really want someone who finishes that book to buy the next book, right? And this is something that I will absolutely agree traditional publishing is terrible about. Sometimes they don't want to number the books in a series. They don't do very simple things like have the pre order link at the end of the first book if the next book isn't out. Whereas as a self publisher, that is one of my priorities is to have that at the end of Bright Familiar, the gray magic pre order link is there. And Corrine, my assistant, tries to talk me out of it from time to time because she thinks it puts too much pressure on me to deliver. But I want those sweet, sweet pre-orders because you want to capture that moment, right? Where when the reader finishes the book, and I do this as a reader too, that if I have too much space after I've finished a book, I'll think, do I want to keep going with that series or do I want to start something new? But if that pre order link is right there, I will click because I'm still in the happy haze of having finished that book and I want more. Readers talk about the book hangover, right? We've all experienced that. When you finish a book and you don't want it to be over, you want to live in that world still, and you have this hangover, and it's like, what am I going to read now? Because I can't read this. Or maybe you go back and you read that again. That's that emotion behind the clicking that pre order link. It's like, yes, I want more. Give me more of this thing. And the fact that there are authors who don't want to take advantage of that because it is too commercial, too bourgeois. I wonder how Transcript's going to handle that. I'll have to do a search in my place. Is I understand if you don't want to have to think about those things, if you want to just write what you want to write and be free of these considerations, but then don't bemoan the fact that like that your series sells through isn't good. And and I can look at some of these authors who complain about their series sell through being bad, and I feel like they make bad choices with writing series. that maybe are artistic choices, but are not great marketing choices. So I hate to come down on anybody because it's a hard business and you do the best you can. But for all of that, some, not all, traditionally published authors sneer at the bourgeois of the publishing world. You know, there are things to be learned. And so maybe I'll make a note. If, let me know if you're more interested in hearing about this. But I want to talk about what do you do to make series sell through good? And I can tell you all that in general, it depends on the series. Um, that my worst series sell through is a 50% drop off from book one to book two, which is pretty standard. My best selling series, it's 80%. 80% of the people reading book one and deciding to go on to book two, that makes me happy. And from there, if people read book two, um, then a roughly equivalent number will continue to read through the entire series. Once they're in, they're in. It's a guaranteed audience. And besides the fact that, and I understand if somebody doesn't like writing series, but I love writing series. And so I love having that there are readers who want to be in for that long game. That maybe that the Bonds of Magic World is going to be a 9 book cycle, and that there are those of you who are here for it. And I love that. Anyway, I'm going to go get to work on this novella. Um, I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will talk to you all on Thursday. You all take care.